Hi, this is Dodie Friedenberg, and this is a presentation overview of Salesforce Administrator skills that I created a couple of years ago. It may be slightly dated in a couple of spots, which I'll point out. And I'm going to attempt to do this in one go, so I'm not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm hopeful that it will be helpful to folks who are new to Salesforce, so you can get an overview of what Salesforce provides. Also, people who are new to studying to become a Salesforce administrator, so you understand all the topics you need to develop familiarity with. And also as a review throughout the course of study of Salesforce administrator skills, so you can see how far you've come and how far you have yet to go. And as you prepare, if you wish to take the Salesforce administrator certification exam, my hope is that it will be helpful. It can be overwhelming. There's a lot here. So if you start to feel overwhelmed, I encourage you to sit back, take a deep breath, allow all of this to wash over you, and just know that if you study these topics and then watch this again, you hopefully will see that you've made a lot of progress, and that can feel really good. So all of this is my opinion and my creation. So I'm interested in feedback. Let me know if I've missed something or misspoken, or if this is helpful to you. So here we go. It all starts with data storage, just like in a file cabinet. Everything, a place for everything, and everything in its place. Salesforce is the leading provider of CRM software in the cloud. CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. And CRM is the stock ticker symbol for Salesforce on the stock market. Salesforce comes with a set of standard objects, some that we see all the time that are the core objects, and there are many, many, many other objects as well. I recommend studying or at least looking at the large set of entity relationship diagrams that are available on the force.com or the developer help site to get a sense of the full scope of all of the objects that come standard with Salesforce. And of course, we also have the ability to add custom objects so that we can store data for anything that we need to store. And all of this exists on a platform. It used to be called force.com platform. I think now it may just be called the Salesforce platform. It kind of comes with different names with the branding over the years. And so the key standard objects are accounts, contacts, opportunities, leads, cases, and of course users, meaning the Salesforce users. And then there are many, many, many other objects to use and to learn about. Well, there's no point in storing all of this data if we cannot retrieve the data in useful formats that can inform data-driven decision-making. So we have reports and dashboards. Reports come in 4 formats, and dashboards have many different component types, so we can get great insight from our data. So reports and dashboards is a big enough topic that rather than itemize the skills you need to learn about them, those are going to appear later on their own page. So let's just tuck that away for now in this corner and move on. So in between getting the data into Salesforce and pulling the data out of Salesforce in reports and dashboards, we have all kinds of skills pertaining to user productivity and usability of Salesforce. And this is where the magic happens because of some automation possibilities. Of course, security is paramount. Your Salesforce data lives in the cloud, and so Salesforce goes to great lengths to allow you to set up all kinds of security measures. And this, again, is a big topic, gets its own page in this presentation, so we'll tuck it away for now up there. So content lets users find, edit, and deliver materials to people outside the company, often used by sales reps who can send sales presentations to customers. Communities allow those outside the company to interact with select Salesforce data. For example, to submit cases for support, to submit ideas for bug fixes or enhancements to software, to have a community that helps each other by posting questions and sharing answers, by accessing knowledge articles that the company can post on its site, and more. So this allows customers, partners, and constituents to access parts of our Salesforce org, and communities require community licenses, which is a different pricing structure and goes beyond the licensing, the standard Salesforce licensing. So if you want to set up a community, think of it as a portal into your Salesforce for your customers, partners, or constituents. You'll have to talk to Salesforce about purchasing licenses, and there's a couple of different licensing options to choose from to learn about. So Salesforce itself has set up a community called the Trailblazer Community, which you may become very familiar with. And here is where we find documentation about Salesforce, community groups, knowledge articles, the answers area where people can post questions and other people provide answers from the community, and the idea exchange where you can post or upvote ideas for fixes and enhancements to Salesforce itself. The app exchange is where we can find free and paid add-on or integrated apps from independent software vendors, ISVs. We can also find pre-built reports and dashboards, and we can find partners that can help with Salesforce implementation. We can also find products from Salesforce itself, Salesforce Labs, which are free. So it's kind of like the Apple Store, the Apple, I can't think of the name of it right now, but anyway, it's sort of a marketplace, an online marketplace of things that can enhance your Salesforce instance. Okay, org setup. This is sort of some of that set it and forget it kind of information that you may learn about early on in setting up a Salesforce org. It's important to pay attention to the difference between locale and language. And that can be a little bit confusing because the locales are named in terms of languages, but locale does not control the language. It controls some other things like your date formats, etc. The difference between multi-currency versus advanced currency management. And of course, the company information is a great source of information about your instance, about licenses, about data storage, and on and on. So I believe this gives you the big buckets of the categories of topics of study. And now we'll continue on to flesh out some of the details of these buckets, leaving reports and dashboards and security details for a subsequent page. So here we go. So under data storage, we have to understand about objects and their relationships to each other. It's good to understand the concept of one-to-many versus many-to-many, junction objects, which help create those many-to-many relationships, and the master detail versus lookup fields that can be created on child objects to create relationships to parent objects, and the difference between master detail and lookup, which are similar, do a similar kind of thing, but have very different restrictions and benefits. Data types refers to fields. You can create custom fields on either standard or custom objects, and there's a wide variety of data types available to us. For example, numbers, text, more text that can include HTML, those are rich text, percent, date time, also pick lists, multi-select pick lists, which are ones to probably avoid in most situations. Of course, those master detail and lookup relationships are data types, etc. I think there are about 25 different data types, and it's worth studying and experiencing when you would use each data type and what the options are for each data type. Lookup fields are these master detail or lookup fields. And when you create that kind of relationship, you can see from a parent object record related lists of child records that are related to the parent. And as the system administrator, you can control which related lists are available from each account for different users based on their user profile, which gets into security. We'll get there. Formula fields is another data type, very powerful, and allows you to, sorry for that interruption, allows you to do all kinds of calculations, concatenate text, and even access fields on other objects in your calculations. Be forewarned that formula fields can use data in fields that are hidden from users. And so you can accidentally reveal data that people should not be able to see using a formula field. So be very careful about that when you create formulas. Roll-up summaries, these are very powerful functionality that can only, in native Salesforce, you can only create a roll-up summary on a parent object through a master detail relationship. Sadly, if it's a lookup relationship, you cannot do roll-ups using native Salesforce functionality. There are add-on tools that will let you roll up through a lookup relationship, but if you have a master detail relationship, you can create a roll-up summary. And what this means is that the parent object can have multiple children in a child object. And what we're asking for is that on the parent object, we want to have it look at all the child records for that parent and give us something. It could be a sum, for example, the sum of the amount field on opportunities, and roll that up to account. Or it could be a minimum, like the oldest date, or a maximum, the most recent date, as an example, or an average. So the idea here is that we are rolling up some data from all the child records onto the parent record. And let me back up on the formula fields for a moment and say that a very powerful way to use formula fields is on child records to display some information from the parent. And I believe that could be done from either a master detail or a lookup relationship. And the reason we can do that is that a parent can have many children, but a child is only going to have one parent per object that is parenting it. And so we can display a piece of information from the parent onto each of the children. But we cannot go in reverse. We can't say, show me on using a formula field on the parent some information from children, because there are multiple children. For that, we use a roll-up summary, and the roll-up and summary should clue you in that that is saying you have many children potentially. We're going to look at all those children and do some kind of summarizing and pull that information up to the parent. So that's the difference between formula and roll-up summary when it comes to parent and child relationships. Pick lists. Pick lists are a powerful way to keep the data clean. You've predefined the values that the users can select. And we can also have two different fields that are pick lists. And so that the selection that the user makes in the first pick list controls the pick list choices in a second field. Validation rules help us, again, keep the data clean. We can set up a rule so that the user cannot save the record if it doesn't pass the error condition that's defined in the validation rule. You have to be super careful of these because if you set it up wrong, users will not be able to save records. And if you set it up on a record that is created by an integration, for example, and the data may come in and not meet the validation rules, then that integration's attempt to push that data into Salesforce will fail. And so that may be what you want, but if it's not what you want, it can cause problems. So create validation rules with care and make sure you take into consideration any integrations that are pushing data into Salesforce. Salesforce administrators can set up these matching rules and duplicate prevention rules so they can define how they want Salesforce to try to determine if there's a potential duplicate. Salesforce doesn't natively provide a lot of help with cleaning up duplicates once they are found. So there are some ways to get around that. Salesforce will create records in an object called duplicate record pairs or something like that. You have to actually create a custom report type to report on those, but there are third-party tools that can help with duplicate cleanup. Field history tracking. For each object, you can select up to 20 fields, and from the point that you set that up going forward, any changes that are made to those fields are recorded, and you can display it as a related list on the object. So it can show, for example, this user on this date changed this field. Here was the original value. Here's the new value. Moving into data management, we have native to Salesforce the opportunity to mass update addresses and mass delete records. We can mass transfer records. Say somebody leaves an organization and you want to transfer all of their records to a new user. We have a native import wizard tool that we can use, and we also have an external desktop tool called Data Loader. So we need to understand when we might want to use either tool, what the capabilities and limitations are of each tool. There is a data export service that can be run weekly or monthly. It creates some zip files of your data. You can specify which data to back up. Those then you need to manually export out of Salesforce onto your desktop as a backup of your data. Also keep in mind that there's a way to back up your metadata, meaning your customizations, your configuration of Salesforce, and that's something also to look into. There is a recycle bin. So when users delete records in Salesforce, it goes into a recycle bin. The users have access to their own recycle bin if you make that available to them. And they can go in there and restore records for up to 15 days. After 15 days, the records are hard deleted and the users will not have access. As a system administrator, you will have access to the whole organization's recycle bin so you can see the records that users have deleted for the last 15 days. Moving on to interaction and productivity, we have activities. And there's a lot of terms that all refer to the same objects here. We call them tasks. that's something that you can set up for yourself to do in the future to follow up with a client or an opportunity. And a task could be a call or an event or an email. So the word tasks and activities and calls and events and emails are all referring to basically the same kind of record and the same object. They just have slightly different user interfaces to try to help make the creation of these records easier for the end users. For example, log a call assumes that the call has already been made. And so if the user chooses to log a call, it's going to create a task, but the status is already going to automatically be that it's completed. If the user creates an event, then additional fields are available, such as the end time in addition to the start time and a location. But again, these are all tasks, or also known as activities. This can be very confusing to end users, so something to explore and teach. Email can be sent right out of Salesforce, either to an individual contact or to a group of contacts or from a campaign, and automatically logged onto the contact records. You can set up email templates. You can set up letterhead that will be used in those templates. And there are integrations that come standard with Salesforce, no additional charge, with Gmail or Outlook, which will give your end users, if they would like to sit primarily in Outlook or Gmail, gives them a little window which gives them access to Salesforce and lets them look at Salesforce records, create Salesforce records, and attach emails directly to Salesforce objects. And finally, there is BCC to Salesforce. That is, each user under their settings and under email preferences can find their BCC link. And if they are in their email program and they are emailing an email address that exists on a contact in Salesforce, they can BCC that link, and Salesforce will automatically attach that email content and create a task for that email. Chatter is Salesforce's sort of a collaboration tool. It's kind of like an internal Slack channel, and allows collaboration among users. You can follow records so that you'll be alerted when changes are made on records. You can mention other users, and you can control what kinds of things you see in your feed. It can be internal, or you can even provide external access. Salesforce standard licenses come with large numbers of licenses that you can give to external users and then control what they can do when they participate in the chatter in your organization. So I've put lead conversion here. It kind of all overlaps with leads, which we'll see appear later in this small marketing box. I put it here because it's sort of a user setup issue for the administrator, and it kind of automates processes a little bit. And the idea here is that if you're using the lead object to put leads in there, and at some point, and you're collecting custom information from your leads, say they fill out a form on your website and give you some information, then when you convert them to an account, contact, and optionally an opportunity, we can, as an administrator, map those fields onto fields in those objects and make sure that we don't lose that data when we convert the lead to accounts, contacts, and optionally opportunities. Now we move into automation, and Salesforce comes with some standard customizable automation tools. For example, we can set up email to case. So for our existing customers that are already in Salesforce, we can set it up so that if they email a particular address, it will automatically create a record in the case object. And then we can have all kinds of automation that flows from that. So there are two flavors of email to case and on-demand email to case, and it's important to study, again, the differences, the capabilities, and the limitations of each. There's also web to case and web to lead. So this means you set this up inside Salesforce. It will give you a little snippet of HTML code, which can then be improved upon, made to look prettier, and embedded onto, say, your company's website. And that would allow potential customers to fill out that form and automatically create a lead record in your Salesforce, or existing customers to fill out a form on your website and automatically create cases in your Salesforce instance. Notice here that we can do web to lead, web to case, and email to case. What's missing is email to lead. That is not standard Salesforce functionality out of the box. So once those cases come in, we can set up assignment rules so that based on the data in the case, the case records can be assigned to different users or queues of users. We can also set it up to automatically send an email to the person who submitted the case. We've all received those kinds of automated emails that say, thank you for submitting your case. Here's the case number, you know, and we'll get back to you within whatever it is, 24 hours. And note that you could create different emails in different languages, and Salesforce could detect based on, say, a field in the case record, which version of the letter to send out, all using the auto response rules. Sometimes people get confused. There is a tool called Translation Workbench. It is not involved in this process. Translation Workbench is for translating the user interface. Say you're in Japan and you have users using Salesforce and you create a custom object and it has fields and you want to define you know, how things should appear in that language. That's what you use the Translation Workbench for. You do not need the Translation Workbench to create emails in multiple languages and have auto response rules automatically send the right email in the right language to one of your customers, for example. Escalation rules has to do with cases once again. If a case has not been resolved within a certain amount of time, and let's say the account has a certain level of service that requires that their cases be resolved in a certain amount of time, Salesforce can automatically escalate the case from one queue to another, from one user to another, for example. And approval processes is a really complex and rich automation tool that lets you set things up so that users can submit a record to be approved by one or more other people that need to approve a record before it can progress to a next stage in the process. Say for a certain amount of discount, and you can set up complex criteria. You can set up a complex system of approvals that either you can set it up so that if one person among many approves it, you can go ahead, or you can set it up that it has to be unanimous among all those people. And so that is a whole area of study all in itself. Now, if these automation tools do not meet your needs, and you would always want to go for one of these before you would try to reinvent the wheel. Oh, there's one more, big deal alerts. So you can set it up so that if an opportunity closes above a certain threshold, that it would automatically do certain alerts. But if these tools do not meet your needs, then Salesforce comes with these other tools that let you do all kinds of other automation. So the oldest and simplest ones were called workflow rules. And we are discouraged from creating new workflow rules. We are encouraged to transfer all of our old workflow rules into some of the newer tools, but you will find that there are Salesforce instances where copious workflow rules are in place, and the time has not yet come when the investment wants to be made into transferring all those workflow rules into more modern automation tools. So you will definitely still see workflow rules, and you may even wish to create workflow rules under certain circumstances. The biggest problem with workflow rules, in addition to the fact that it can only do a few kinds of things, is that you can't control which workflow rule fires in which sequence. So we have the Process Builder, which is better in that regard. We can actually control the sequence of events, and Process Builder can do most of the things that workflow rules can do, but also a lot more things. These are all point and click tools, and they allow us to set up time-dependent actions. So we can set up something that happens right away based on criteria, or we can set something up to happen, say, in 7 days or 30 days, for example. And then the most powerful point and click automation tool we have is called Flow. And Flow uses programming concepts such as variables and loops, but allows you to set that up in a declarative way without having to learn a programming language. And Process Builder and Flow can sometimes be used together, so that the Process Builder determines the criteria under which a flow is then kicked off. Flow is being enhanced all the time, and it seems like we're moving towards the day when the hope would be that most automation would be built in Flow. However, flows are fairly complex to set up. It's sort of a whole study in itself. And those who have some programming background may find it easier to understand what needs to be set up in a flow. And those without programming backgrounds may struggle a bit to understand how to begin to build flows. So Salesforce does have a mobile app, used to be called Mobile Lite. And also there's a mobile app for Salesforce administrators. And this has some limited functionality, but certainly for on the go, using your iPhone, for example, a Salesforce administrator can send a user a password reset, or can freeze a user if necessary. So it's worth looking into and downloading this app and exploring what you can do as an administrator with the Salesforce A mobile app. So moving on, Salesforce, of course, has other products that it sells for marketing. Pardot is one, and it has a whole marketing cloud. But within the standard Salesforce CRM product, there are pieces that are typically handled by the marketing department. And that is leads, obviously. How do we get leads? What are our sources of leads? How do we get the leads into Salesforce? We talked about lead conversion down here, and also campaigns. Campaigns can be a little confusing in Salesforce. You don't actually run the campaign in Salesforce, but you can indicate as a Salesforce record, a campaign record, a campaign that you're running. Maybe it's a set of billboards. Maybe it's a set of online ads. Maybe it's an event that you're running. Any kind of effort that your organization is making to build clientele, to get leads, Any of those kinds of efforts are referred to as campaigns. And you can have a campaign hierarchy. You can designate who is a member of that campaign, in other words, who you're targeting in that campaign. And then as opportunities close, you can specify which campaign or campaigns may have influenced the closing of the opportunity. And therefore we can also record how much it cost to run the campaign and compare that to how many sales closed and the total amount of money that was brought in by that campaign, and therefore study the ROI, the return on investment of running that campaign in Salesforce. So the Salesforce Administrator has the opportunity to customize the user interface for Salesforce for the unique needs of each organization. We can control the names of tabs and how the tabs appear within apps. Apps in Salesforce mean a collection of tabs, objects, and functionality that can be useful for different sets of users in your org. There are global UI settings in the setup menu. This is worth studying all the options that you have to change the user interface globally. There's also a session settings item in setup that's worth exploring. So list views. List views are available on tabs per object and are very powerful. You can set them up for your users, or you can give users the ability to create their own list views. They can control what's the filtering, so which records are included in the list, and also fields, so which columns are available in the list. List views are a little bit like reports, and oftentimes when a user asks you for a report or a list view, you need to think about which one is going to meet the need. If it's for a single object, then a list view may suffice. If they want to be able to see fields from multiple objects or filter based on different objects, then you're probably looking at creating a report instead of a list view. Page layouts can be customized so that users see the right fields in the right locations. Record types let us define different kinds of records within one object, and then we can potentially have different page layouts based on the record type. Some fields may be necessary for to be displayed for some record types, but not for others. Some fields may be required for certain record types, but not for others. We can even have a different page layout if the record type changes. Business processes are series of stages that the record goes through. Salesforce calls that a business process. And you actually go to the business process area for the object to set up the sequence of stages that the records go through. And so you might have different record types that might have, each record type may have its own business process. And so the combination of these three features, along with profiles from security, can really let you tailor the experience for the end users, can streamline processes and also control processes based on the different combinations that are available of these three tools, along with the profiles that determine what's available to each set of users. And finally, we can rename tabs and labels. So this is in its own area of the setup menu, which can be very confusing because you would think that when you're editing the object, editing the fields on an object, you would be able to change the label right there. But I think Salesforce wisely does not make that so easy, because you really should think twice when renaming standard tab names and renaming standard field labels. Salesforce is highly customizable, and so it does give you the option under Setup, Rename Tabs and Labels to change a tab name, which in effect changes the object name for the end users everywhere. So for example, in a nonprofit setting, they might want to change the opportunity object to be gifts or donations, and they can do that, and many have. That makes it more user-friendly for the nonprofit. It's terminology they're more used to. The drawback is that when they are interfacing with Salesforce for customer service, for going to Dreamforce, for going to user group meetings, for going to a Dreamin' event, or reading the documentation, or watching a webinar, or talking to a third-party integrator who's going to mention opportunities, and the user is going to say, opportunities, what are you talking about? Because they know that object as gifts or donations. And so that's a decision to be made for each organization, a conversation to have. Do we want to rename the tabs so that it's more familiar to you, but you're a bit out of step with the rest of the Salesforce world? Or do we want to have the users at the organization just adopt Salesforce terminology and understand that opportunity means gift or donation, and therefore you're more in step with the rest of the Salesforce world? And the same thing goes for the labels on fields. So we've made it to all the details on this page. These are the major areas of study for Salesforce administration and for the certification exam. It's a lot. Take it one step at a time and you can get through it all. As you dig in and learn these topics, you'll be able to look back on this graphic and see how far you've come. So now we can go into a little more detail on security, as promised, and reports and dashboards. So security tools. There are many layers of security in Salesforce that can be employed. So first of all, we're going to control who can even log into Salesforce. And we do that through our organization setup, which defines certain things about who can log in and when. User record, you need a user record, a login to be able to log into Salesforce. And then your profile is also going to determine things about when and how you log in. Access to capabilities is controlled through both your user record. So for example, there's a checkbox on the user record called marketing user. If you don't have that box checked, you can use campaigns, but you cannot create a campaign. So that's an example of how the user record controls access to different capabilities in Salesforce. Most capabilities in Salesforce are controlled by permissions, and there are many, 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 many permissions. It's worth studying or reading through at least and getting familiar with all the various different permissions that can be granted or denied in a profile. And the users are each assigned to one profile. So that's a set of permissions for a group of users. And optionally, you can create permission sets that can add additional permissions above and beyond what the user is able to do based on their profile. So access to objects, to apps, to tabs, to page layouts, to record types, and more is all controlled, again, through the profiles and permission sets. So the profile and permission sets control what you can do and also control what you can do it on, or what you can see in terms of objects, apps, tabs, page layouts, and record types. Now, if you have the ability to do it and you have access to the thing, the object, for example, We can also control down to the record level which records within those objects you are allowed to see or edit. And that is controlled by a whole series of tools. It starts with the OWD, org-wide default. So for each object, we can define whether everyone can see everything, or we should lock down that object so that people only see the records they own. And then we can use these tools per object to open up the sharing of records so that people can see records they don't own. So we can set up a role hierarchy, which is somewhat like the your org chart, but not necessarily identical to your org chart. It requires some thinking through, which basically says the people higher up on the role hierarchy can see or edit the records that belong to people below them in the role hierarchy if in the OWD the role hierarchy is in force. And then in addition to that, if we've locked down an object in the OWD, and we can have sharing in a up and down way from supervisor levels to underling levels. We can also set up sharing rules that can share horizontally. So we can share, for example, with public groups. We can share with other roles. We can set up teams that would allow us to share an account or share an opportunity with the people in the team. And finally, we can enable a button that would allow users to manually share a particular record with other people in the organization. And then we can go all the way down to the granular level of controlling access to particular fields. This is super important if you're not seeing the field or your users are not seeing the field. Don't despair, always check your field level security. And that is set per profile and permission set. The access to fields is determined once again in profiles and permission sets. So we see that profiles and permission sets control field level security, control access to all of these kinds of things over here, objects, apps, tabs, page layouts, record types, and also is where we specify the permissions to do all kinds of things. Now, one more security tool, and that is that reports, dashboards, email templates, and documents are stored in folders, and we can set the access, the sharing access to folders. So we can say anybody who has, read access in this folder can see all the reports in this folder, or anyone who has edit access to this folder can edit all the dashboards in this folder, for example. In order to be able to see any reports, you would need to have those permissions in your profile. So profiles and permission sets can work together with folders to enforce security for these things: reports, dashboards, email templates, and documents. So that's an overview of the security tools that you must master. And now we can move on to reports. There are custom and standard report types. The report type enforces the objects and object relationships and filtering that's already done when you choose an underlying report type for any report. There are 4 report formats: tabular, summary, matrix, and joined. We can do filtering to determine which records are included in the report, cross-filtering on child records. We can sort only one column at a time. We can summarize, meaning do a little bit of math on those groupings and say, for example, what's the total of all the opportunities in this group, grouping by stage, for example. We can do bucketing. This means we're going to take the values in one field and categorize them and name them. We can do that on number fields. We can do that on text fields. We can do that on pick list fields. So for example, we can say small opportunities are from $0 to $1,000. Medium size opportunities are from 1,000 to 5,000, and anything over 5,000 is large. And so those words, small, medium, and large, would then appear in that column. Then you could group on that column. Rather than looking at the specific values, you're looking at groups of values. In reports, you can create formulas. So you can do more complex math than comes standard with the Salesforce reports. You can sum, average, get the min, or get the max. If you need to do something more complicated than that, you can create a formula within the report. And you have to consider whether to create the formula just within a report, or would it be better to create the formula field on the object, and then it would be available to all reports on page layouts, in list views, etc. Conditional highlighting lets the person who's setting up the report specify ranges of values and a color to highlight the value if it's within that range. So typically you might use green, yellow, and red. Red being something that's hot or in danger, and something green is okay, and something yellow that's more of a warning. And whatever the range of values is will determine what color the value is presented as. Highlighting does not mean that the end user goes through and says, ooh, let's highlight this, let's highlight this. It's something that is set ahead of time in the report that says, if the value is in this range, make it yellow. If the value is in this range, make it pink. If it's in this range, make it purple, etc. And of course, keep in mind that the security for reports is determined by the access to folders and also the access to records as based on the OWD, the role hierarchy, the sharing rules, and the manual sharing and teams. Determines what users will see in their report. Dashboards. You can have a maximum of 20 different components on your Lightning dashboard. We have a variety of charts that we can choose from. And by the way, we can have charts on reports as well. And dashboard components are based on reports. So you first have to set up your report. And if it's just a tabular report, meaning it just has rows and columns, you cannot use it in a dashboard component. Because dashboard components, like charts, are looking for summarized data, right? We're not looking for a bar for every data point. We're looking for a bar for groups of records. Same thing with pie charts or line charts or funnels or donuts or scatter charts or stacked bar charts. We would need the report to be either a summary report or a matrix report in order to be able to add a chart to the dashboard. Metrics and gauges are interesting components. They each really focus on one number. That is the grand total from your report. A metric just displays the number. So total opportunities won this quarter. Let's say that's the metric you're looking at. It would just display that number. A gauge takes that same number, but shows it as like a speedometer gauge, right? The goal number is over here, and you can define an arc. You can define the colors. Let's say when we're starting out, it's green, or it's red, we're in a danger zone because it's very low, then yellow, we're getting closer to our goal, and then green when we get to our goal. But it's all based on just that one total number that comes from the grand summary of your report. You can set up filters for the entire dashboard so the users can change the data that is shown in the dashboard. You can allow the users to drill down to the reports that underlie the components. Dashboards need to be refreshed. They don't automatically refresh when you just view a dashboard. So always take a look at the date when it was last refreshed. You may be looking at stale data. Go ahead and click the refresh button. It can take a little while for all of that to repaint to see the latest data. And you can schedule the dashboard to run and email a picture of the dashboard to specific users. You can also schedule reports to run and get emailed to specific users. Now, you must study the difference between dynamic dashboards and fixed dashboards. Fixed dashboards is where you specify who will the running user be, and everyone will see the results based on as if they were that running user, versus dynamic dashboards, which are going to run for each user, and each user is going to see the data that they should see. And of course, that's a security issue with revealing data, depending on what's revealed in the dashboard. You have to select that carefully. And again, access to dashboards is controlled by what folder the dashboard's in and what the sharing is for that folder. And people will see record access based on who the running user is. Also, there's a number of permissions that determine what people can do with dashboards. There are also a number of permissions that determine what people can do with reports. And don't forget that at the App Exchange, there are sets of reports and dashboards available that you can install into your org instead of, and then customize rather than building them from scratch. Now, there are a number of topics that you may see referenced on the Salesforce certification exam, or that are focused on more in the advanced admin study and certification. And although they are not necessarily required topics for Salesforce Admin, they are worth taking a look at just to be familiar, to know what these things are, a little bit about how they work. I mentioned Translation Workbench as an example earlier when we talked about customizing what language auto response emails to submitted cases are. You do not need the Translation Workbench for that. Translation Workbench customizes the actual Salesforce user interface for Salesforce users who speak different languages. And finally, I am showing here the weighting, and this does change slightly over time. So you always want to consult the current certification guide for the latest weighting of topics. But this, generally speaking, doesn't change too much over time. Security is a heavily weighted topic, followed by data storage, data modeling, fields, objects, all of this sort of thing, field history tracking, duplicate management, validation rules. This would be the second biggest topic, followed closely by automation. Of course, if you combine these two sections, may even supersede security. So 21% on automation, 20% on security, 14% on data management. Look up here, if you combine content with leads and campaigns, this is, again, 14%, very high topic, and often sort of not given a lot of weight in study, but definitely worth your attention when you study these topics. And then followed by data management, all of these skills down here, and reports and dashboards at 10% each. And then there are some smaller topics where you do want to learn these things and you want to be familiar, but they're going to take a smaller percentage of your study time. And that's the org setup, mobile apps, the App Exchange, tasks and activities, and emails and chatter. Well, I hope this has been helpful, not too overwhelming. Open to your feedback. Thanks for listening.